The next guy I'd like to ask, who's kind of like an extended guru in my family for my teacher, Ray Dillard, would be Mr. Bob Becker. And I know that you...
Is there a question?
You have some chops. So aside from your studies with Pandit Charta Sahai, just tell us how that came from you playing mallets and Western into what you're now known for, which is being a world music ensemble in many ways.
Yeah, that's an interesting term, world ensemble, world music. Was it Louis Armstrong who said all music is folk music? And you can say all music is world music. It's a funny kind of categorization. For me, there were two people I think I could name. Both were named John, by the way, and not including you in this case, but one was John Cage and the other John Wire, who influenced me a lot. And often people ask, what was it that drew me to study a particular musical tradition? And in most cases it has to do with the sound of the instruments or the music. John Cage was someone who opened my ears to listen to sound in every way. And John Wire took that into the real world for me anyhow. He was the first person I came into contact with who was sort of living John Cage's concept of every sound is interesting, every sound is musical. The issue is, can you get it? Can I hear it? Can I stop judging things as being music or not music? And can I right away accept it as interesting and part of my palette? That was and is an ongoing adventure, I'd say. And meeting John, I think I met him for the first time in 1968 when those of us who are now in Nexus played together for the first time at the Marlborough Music Festival in Vermont. And we were doing Stravinsky Les Noces that summer. John, of course, had already begun collecting all sorts of sound makers, not only instruments, but he was especially fascinated with metallic sounds, and in particular ones that resonated and rang for long periods of time. And I and all the other fellows that were there at that summer, Russ and Bill Kahn, Robin Engelman, began to spend a lot of time with John and his instruments, listening in that way. John eventually would create an environment wherever he lived, even if it was a temporary place, and he would have instruments all around him so that even if he was in bed, I remember he would wake up in the morning, he had a dahina positioned at the foot of his bed. I know this is completely unorthodox and maybe poor practice, but John had control of his big toe in a pretty strong way. He would reach out with his big toe and get a really nice tone out of the tabla, right? The first thing he'd hear when he'd wake up. There would be bells hanging everywhere, and very often many small bells that were strung from the ceiling, so that they were just in contact with one another, and with a slight push they would begin to swing and create music. Would go on for 10 minutes. You could listen to this, and it was different every time. It was, if you listened to it as music, it was remarkable. So for me, the sounds were the thing. And when I first encountered Indian music, for example, it was sort of like you, John. That I heard a recording. I didn't hear a live performance. It was Mahapurush, your teacher. That what was the name of that first LP that came out?
The
Transcendental Tal. And someone was playing it in the lobby of my dormitory at Eastman. This was in 1969, I believe. And I had no idea what it was. It was just an amazing sound. So I found out what the record was, got a copy of it, began to listen to it. I didn't have any idea how the sounds were being made. But it wasn't the idea that there were 5 guys doing it or something like that. It was baffling to me what was going on rhythmically, technically, but I could very strongly relate to this sound. And so when I got to New York City that summer, you remember the House of Musical Traditions
Sure.
down in the Village?
Sure. Yeah.
So I bought a set of tabla there, and it was a nice set. It was good sound. I had no idea how to play it correctly, but I could make some sounds on it, and I was just happy to do that. And then I lucked out, probably like a lot of us at that time. This was in the summer of 1970. I was finishing my master's at Eastman, and there happened to be a consortium group from University of Pennsylvania came up and did an exchange program not with the Eastman School of Music, where there was no music outside of the Western classical tradition at that time, but at the University of Rochester campus. But I found out about it, and Lalmani Misra was there from Banaras Hindu University, and Dr. Harold Powers was there, a great ethnomusicologist who still is writing incredible things about music from all around the world. And Gyan Prakash Ghosh was the tabla teacher who came up with that group, so he was my first introduction to when you talk about hearing Shankar Ghosh, I was thinking, like, how much better can you get? So you get these incredible players that were sort of in the air at first in North America. So I had a couple of months of instruction on tabla with Gyan Ghosh and studying with Harold, and it was wonderful. And it's like a immersion in Indian music for 2 months. And then I went back to school, right, finishing my degree. It was another world, but I kept practicing, so I found that was of great excitement for me to have that opportunity to really learn how to make the sounds correctly on the instruments. After that, I went to a very interesting school. You went west, I went east. There was a music department at Wesleyan University, and this was something that was developed primarily by another ethnomusicologist, a guy named Robert Brown, who had left Wesleyan by the time I got there. I went there in 1971, but his vision for the program was solidly in place there. And he had kind of pioneered a paradigm shift in ethnomusicology. He was the one, I think, who coined the term world music department. And his idea was that you would still learn the techniques of analysis, you would still do field work, you would study in the old-fashioned ethnomusicological way, which is kind of a European study approach, but he wanted people to do that in the context of many traditions, not only one. And in order to create that kind of an environment, he was able to fundraise and get the school on board to invite visiting artists from some of the major music cultures around the world. So when I arrived there were first-class teachers of South Indian Carnatic music, both Veena and Mridangam, North Indian music, tabla, sitar, vocal. And, of course, as soon as you invite some of these visiting artists, you often get their families as well, who are remarkable musicians. There was Javanese gamelan and dance, West African drumming and dance. Navajo music was strongly represented. My roommate when I first arrived was one of the national treasures of Korea. I studied Chango with him. On and on. For a percussionist, when you go outside of the Western tradition, you find that drums and percussion are the lead instrument. Just go to Indonesia, and you find that the orchestra is 95% percussion, and you might have one string instrument and a couple of flutes. That's the orchestra. That's completely the opposite of what we know from Western Europe. So when you get to a world music program like Brown had developed, at least at that time in the early 70s, it was one of the most exciting percussion resources in the country. And so for me it was a fantastic environment. I thrived there.